So let's bring in right now editor-in-chief of The Economist, Zanny Minton-Betta. Zanny, why don't we begin with what we were talking about before, and that is, of course, the fact that you now have two Republican candidates who are the two most likely to receive that nomination, who are basically parroting Kremlin talking points, calling this a territorial dispute between Russia and Ukraine. What does that do to NATO? What fear does that strike in our allies and friends?
I think your conversation before was exactly right. It instills a substantial amount of fear. You know, will the U.S. be here? Will the U.S. continue after 24? And I think it's interesting. I'm not, obviously Donald Trump has been saying this kind of stuff for a while. The question really is, how much is Ron DeSantis now saying things that he thinks he needs to say in order to try and, win over some of the President Trump's voters, and how much does he really believe this? And I think the interesting question is, I think back in 2014, he was in favor early on of supporting Ukraine. So this is a new kind of Ron DeSantis, and the question is this a Ron DeSantis for winning the primaries or trying to win the primaries, or is this what he really believes? And we simply don't know.
Well, you look at what he said back in 2015. You look at what he said last year after the invasion. And yes, this is not the same Ron DeSantis. He's trying to shapeshift, I guess, to get more in line with Donald Trump, which, well, has him spouting Kremlin talking points about territorial disputes. Let's talk now about the Biden Sunak bilat yesterday, and specifically, we talked to Janice Mackey Frayer about China's warnings and China's anger at the United States, quote, containing them. Sounds an awful lot like what Japan was saying before World War II. What was your takeaway from the bilat yesterday between the leaders of the United States and the UK?
And the shift towards this creation of AUKUS, providing nuclear submarines for Australia, is a really interesting and important move, I think. And it suggests that there's going to be ongoing and massive cooperation of the sort that the US has never really done in allowing access beyond the UK. Actually has access to those kind of submarines, but not Australia. I think it is both sensible, it's pooling resources, it's clearly taking a stand against China's potential aggression in that region, but it's also one that is going to be seen by China and has been seen as an aggressive one. So look, I think it's important, it's essential, it's the new kind of security in the Asia-Pacific region, but it reminds you of just how dangerous that part of the world is. And we've been looking, in the last issue of The Economist, we looked very carefully at Taiwan. And it's really terrifying when you look at it. And it's terrifying when you see the direction that the US and the direction that China are going in. And over the next few years, as you've discussed many times on this show, this is, I think, probably the most dangerous place on earth.
Zanny, what is your sense of European capitals today, given the pronouncements by Governor DeSantis, given the continuing unrest among a certain wing of the Republican Party about continued aid to Ukraine? Governments don't plan day to day. They plan months ahead. And is there any trepidation that the United States, in Europe, is there any trepidation in European capitals that the United States might be viewed as an unstable democracy, that they don't know what, in effect, will happen in next year's elections in 2024?
So I think there are two things going on in European capitals. Firstly, over the past year, since Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, there has been extraordinary transatlantic cooperation. And, the United States has been there, has led this, has been working under the Biden administration incredibly closely with the European allies. And I think that the sort of reality of today is much better and much stronger than anyone might have expected even a year ago. But set against that, there is a question of, will this continue? And on the one hand, you've seen very strong bipartisan support in Congress, and you have Republican leaders, in both chambers of Congress, going to Kiev. There's a constant procession of U.S. politicians going to Kiev saying, we're here, we're with you, we're here with you for the duration. And yet at the same time, European leaders are watching what is going on in the primaries. They're watching what Donald Trump is saying. That's no surprise. But now they're hearing what Governor DeSantis is saying. which is clearly a shift. For a long time, he said nothing about these subjects. And what he is saying now is worrying. And I think there is an uncertainty, as there has been for many years, about can we rely on the US? Do we know that the US is going to be here? And right now, the stakes in that are incredibly high, given the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, I've actually heard from a Biden administration official this morning saying the other fear they have about what DeSantis and Trump are saying about Ukraine is it might inspire Republicans in Congress now to start trying to cut back funding to send this year to the war effort. And we know, of course, it's going to embolden Putin. So but let's shift gears to some of the banking stuff over the last few days. We know the president, had to be sort of convinced over the weekend to get this done, but was told, look, the risk of a contagion was so high they felt like they had to do something, and he emphasizes helping small businesses rather than the crypto community and Silicon Valley. But it's certainly instability. We saw the markets react yesterday. What's the fear of perhaps global impact? There are banks around the world that could be impacted by this?
Well, I think, first of all, I was here. I lived in Washington in 2008 in the global financial crisis. And this is nothing like that, but that kind of sense of deja vu when you had reports over the weekend, regulators meeting, and then the Sunday night press release. This brought back terrible memories of that period. I think there is a sudden recognition from this that actually, the impact of the sharp rise in interest rates, which was sort of the underlying cause of, or part of the underlying cause of Silicon Valley Bank's failure, that is going to have knock-on effects. And the reason that you're seeing all of these bank share prices tumble is that there's a sudden kind of, oh my goodness, which are the other weak links? Where are the other banks? And in the aftermath of 2008, there was a very big push to clean up and to strengthen the banking system, to recapitalize it, and to really put in rules that would prevent kind of major systemic risk from banks. And what actually happened was that that really did happen to some point, but two things have happened since then. One is that there was regulatory rollback in 2017 and 2018, and Silicon Valley Bank, they used to have a limit of any bank which had more than 50 billion would have to be subject to this extra regulation, extra supervision, and would have to have a plan in place for how to deal with a crisis, how to kind of deal with its own demise. And Silicon Valley Bank would have been covered by that, was covered by that. But there was a big push in the mid-teens, particularly under the Trump administration, that this was regulatory overkill. It was too much of a burden for small and medium-sized banks. And therefore, the limit was raised. It was raised to 250 billion, and Silicon Bank was no longer covered. And therefore, it was able to kind of go on the bender that it did go on. And now the question is, how many other banks are actually weaker than people thought they were? And that kind of question, I think, is going to be had around the globe.
OK. America doesn't always love regulations, but there may be revisiting of that deregulation. Zanny, I haven't had a chance to talk to you this morning. I will see you in London in a couple of weeks when I can talk more off-air. Editor-in-Chief at The Economist, Zanny Winton Meadows. As ever, thank you for joining the programme.